Hello, everybody. I'm Brainy Diode, and you know what? I want to talk about animated movies. Why? Because they're fun and I like them. With the 2010s recently over, I figured this was as good a time as any to talk about some really good movies that came out during the decade. So here's how it's going to work. I've picked out what I think is the best animated movie released in each year from 2010 to 2019. I put them in order from least absolutely amazing to most absolutely amazing, and I selected between 2 and 4 honorable mentions for each year as well. For this list, I tried my best not to let my personal opinion affect my choices too much, although it obviously did at some points. Instead, I'm judging these movies by criteria such as how technically impressive and or unique they are, how visually appealing they are, their pacing, their writing quality, and how interesting the characters are. Obviously, a lot of those are subjective in and of themselves, but art is subjective, so get over it. Also, it probably goes without saying, but I've seen all of the movies on this list. However, there are 4 honorable mentions that I haven't actually seen, and honestly, I'm kind of curious to see if anyone can guess which they are. There are going to be some very obvious picks, a few not very obvious picks, and maybe even 1 or 2 movies that you haven't heard of before. But if I can convince anybody to try out an excellent film that they may not have seen before for one reason or another, I'm willing to call that a job well done. Without further ado, let's get started. Number 10, 2013. So, immediately after claiming that I would try to be as objective as possible, I'm going to make a controversial pick. Why, in the year in which arguably the most popular Disney animated movie, not just in the past decade, but in the past 2, came out? Am I picking something different? Let's just say I wanted to give credit to something that stands out from the crowd a little more. The animated movie of 2013 is the Studio Shaft film Puella Magi Madoka Magica The Movie Part 3 Rebellion, which I will be referring to as Rebellion for this segment as a time-saving measure. Did I say controversial? Well, I meant it. Rebellion is, as the title suggests, the third tie-in film to the wildly popular TV anime Puella Magi Madoka Magica. But while the first 2 films are merely a retelling of the series with some improved animation and sound design, Rebellion is a new story altogether. It follows the 6 members of the main cast of the series, Madoka, Sayaka, Mami, Kyoka, Madura, and Kyubei, as they gradually realize it has somehow become impossible to leave the city they live in. If you've seen the original series, and you'll want to if you want to understand anything going on in this movie, you'll immediately understand something's very wrong. But don't worry, after a while hanging out in the idyllic world at the start of the movie, you get to watch the characters' lives, and eventually the whole universe, fall apart around them. From the word go, this movie is full of the surreal, beautiful, but haunting art and sound design that made the series what it was, and the story is terrifying in all the right ways. While it does slow down the pacing immensely to revel in the victory lap that is the first quarter of the movie and a couple of action sequences with striking visuals that pretty much just exist to have action sequences with striking visuals, seeing his selfishness is one of the most predominant themes in this movie. I think that it really works in this case. Unfortunately, I can't really say too much more without spoiling a ton, but suffice it to say that while Rebellion might not quite live up to its predecessor, it's a darn good follow-up. My honorable mentions for this year are Frozen, The Wind Rises, and Monsters University. Number 9, 2011. I would be lying if I told you I expected a Nickelodeon movie to find its way on this list, but here we are. The animated movie of 2011 is the Nickelodeon Movies film Rango. Rango follows the titular character, a lizard who gets stranded in the Wild West, as he begins to make a name for himself and works to solve the mystery of the disappearance of his new hometown's water supply. Regardless of what your opinion of Rango's art style is, you can't deny that it knows exactly what it wants to look like, and it is completely uncompromising in its aesthetic. Just like with the last one of the best words I can use to describe this movie is distinctive. But don't go thinking the visuals are all this movie has going for it. The characters are memorable, the action scenes are inventive, and watching Rango transform from a literal nameless nobody to a local legend is simultaneously silly, nerve-wracking, and heartwarming, a trio of emotions that the film manages to juggle surprisingly well. I don't really have anything else to say about this one, other than if you've passed it up before because of the studio that made it, or because it doesn't look cute or pretty, you really ought to give it another shot. My honorable mentions for this year are Phineas and Ferb Across the Second Dimension, and Pokemon the Movie, Victini and Zekrom, and Victini and Reshiram. Number 8, 2019. Now here's another thing I wouldn't have expected to be on this list at the start of the decade, a Christmas movie. The animated movie of 2019 is the Sergio Pablos Animation Studios film Klaus. Klaus tells the story of Jesper, a pampered son of the postmaster. Fed up with Jesper's laziness, his father decides to teach him a lesson by forcing him to take over the post office on a frigid northern island where everyone hates each other. Keeping the post office afloat looks impossible, until Jesper meets the mysterious woodsman who lives far away from the other villagers. We haven't seen a mainstream, traditionally animated movie in quite a while, so this is a pleasant return to form, and it looks wonderful. As for the story, it's the old classic liar reveal plot as Jesper hides his intentions from nearly everybody in the village for most of the plot. But while it's nothing we haven't seen before, the characters really make the movie. I've heard comparisons between Jesper and Kuzco from Emperor's New Groove, and I can really see it. Jesper and Klaus are a wonderful duo who play excellently off each other once their friendship kicks in, and most of the humor in the movie lands really well. While there isn't a huge roster of named side characters, those who do get introduced are just as fun as the main cast. The obligatory plot-mandated misunderstanding didn't really work too well in my opinion, which is a big factor in preventing it from getting higher on the list. But I had a huge grin on my face for almost the entire rest of the movie. It's not every year that a new film can enter the pantheon of Christmas classics, and I suppose it's too soon to see if this movie will, but I think it's got a darn good shot. My honorable mentions for this year are Frozen 2, Toy Story 4, and How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World. Number 7, 2014. Speaking of How to Train Your Dragon, the animated movie of 2014 is the DreamWorks animation film How to Train Your Dragon 2. How to Train Your Dragon 2 follows Hiccup as he struggles with the knowledge that he will soon become Chief of Berk, a responsibility that he doesn't feel ready for at all. Meanwhile, he and Astrid encounter a group of dragon trappers led by a mysterious man that Hiccup's father is for some reason extremely terrified of. This movie does what every good sequel should. Expands on the world in new and interesting ways, pits the protagonists against new struggles, both internal and external, that follow logically from where the characters ended the original, and introduces new characters and/or plot elements that supplement what already exists without overpowering it. Ultimately, this is a great way to introduce us to new parts of the Dragon world that really makes a ton of sense through the lens of characters we're already acquainted with and without sacrificing what made the original great. My only significant complaint is that the finale felt just a little too similar to what happened in the first movie, but that's a relatively minor blemish on an otherwise fantastic film. My honorable mentions for this year are The Book of Life, Big Hero 6, and The Lego Movie. Number 6, 2015. For a long time, Pixar has had a reputation as a studio that could do no wrong. Unfortunately, though, they had a bit of a dry spell in the 2010s. Don't get me wrong, some of their movies from the decade were real gems, but there were a lot that, well, weren't. Fortunately, right in the middle of the worst of it, we got the animated movie of 2015, the Pixar Animation Studios film Inside Out. Inside Out tells the story of a girl named Riley as she moves to a different town for the first time, and how personifications of her emotions deal with such a life-changing event. You don't see many movies made with younger folks in mind that explore the values of emotions that are traditionally seen as negative, so this movie definitely gets points for respecting its audience. Speaking of emotions, the film manages to run the gamut from silly to tear-jerking to heartwarming without ever feeling particularly jarring. And the film's attention to how someone's views on their own memories can change over time was certainly unique. It's rare that a person only feels one emotion at a time, and Pixar knows that, and weaves it into the ending wonderfully. Add that to the unique designs of the different areas of the world inside Riley's mind, and you get a movie that does a great job of reminding us why we love Pixar so much. My honorable mentions for this year are the Peanuts movie and The Little Prince. Number 5, 2010. Now, here's a spot where the format of this list betrays me a little, because while I think that the original How to Train Your Dragon is a little bit stronger than its sequel, it isn't quite the best animated movie of its year. That distinction actually goes to a different film from the same studio. The animated movie of 2010 is the DreamWorks animation film Megamind. Megamind follows the supervillain of the same name following the defeat of his arch-rival Markiplier, Metro Man. When Megamind gets bored with his unrestricted rule over Metro City, he takes it upon himself to create a new hero to do battle against. Like most of the movie-going public, I found this movie decent but forgettable upon its release, but my fondness for it has grown significantly over the last several years. And no, that isn't just because of the memes. This is a genuinely good movie. The characters are endearing, most of the humor lands well, and Megamind's redemption arc is both completely believable and really wholesome. Unlike a certain movie earlier on this list, the liar reveal moment is played excellently. And with its positioning significantly earlier in the script than usual, there's plenty of time for the movie to really examine the consequences. But what I really want to mention here is that this is a superhero parody movie featuring a nice guy as the main antagonist, and those are both concepts that have gained a lot more popularity since the movie's release. Yes, I know superhero movies and neckbeards both existed before 2010, but both of these have, as far as I'm aware, become significantly more, shall we say, mainstream over the past decade. Now, I'm certainly not going to claim that Megamind is responsible for this, or that DreamWorks predicted the future, but it's not too often that a genre parody is just as, if not more relevant 10 years after release, as it is the day that it came out. And I think the movie deserves to be commended for that. Also, allow me to point out that the only major divergence in the backstories of Megamind and Metro Man is that Metro Man was taken in by a rich family, while Megamind was adopted by criminals, and that Megamind's redemption begins in earnest when he starts hanging out with the right people. Is this a commentary on how people are shaped largely by the circumstances they are born into, and the dangers of punishing people based on behaviors driven more by the system doing the punishing than by the individuals doing the behavior? Or am I just reading too deep into a Goofy Kids movie? Well, an important aspect of art like this is that the text says what the text says, regardless of what the authors meant it to say. My honorable mentions for this year are How to Train Your Dragon, Despicable Me, Toy Story 3, and Tangled. Number 4, 2012. What? A video game movie that's actually good? Is such a thing even possible? Apparently so, because the animated movie of 2012 is the Walt Disney Animation Studios film Wreck-It Ralph. The movie follows the titular character Wreck-It Ralph, villain of the fictional arcade game Fix-It Felix Jr., who decides he's had enough of being a bad guy. So he goes on a quest through different games in the arcade to find a new calling, leading him to cross paths with Vanellope, an exiled glitchy character from the racing game Sugar Rush. The plot is pretty simple, the visuals, while still easy and fun to look at, are pretty safe, and the message is nothing you haven't heard before, but where the movie really shines is its characters. Ralph and Vanellope are simply delightful to see on screen, and their dynamic and the way it evolves throughout the course of the film is adorable, believable, and just really fun to experience. Most of the side characters are nothing to scoff at either, and seeing classic game characters like Sonic, Q*bert, Zangief, and Tapper incorporated in respectful and not overpowering ways was fun as well. Ultimately, that's what this whole movie is. Just pure, simple fun. And sometimes that's all a movie needs to be. My honorable mentions for this year are Wolf Children and One Piece Film Z. Number 3, 2017. I love Coco. I really do. It was my favorite Pixar movie of the decade, and frankly, I probably enjoy it more than the one I'm going to talk about, but I did say I was going to try to be at least a little subjective, and I cannot deny the immense and incredible artistry of a certain other piece. So the animated movie of 2017 is the Breakthrough Productions film Loving Vincent. If you've never heard of Loving Vincent, I can't say I'm surprised, but do yourself a favor and go watch the trailer. The movie follows the rowdy son of a postman tasked with delivering a letter from Vincent van Gogh to his brother a year after the artist's death, and how this errand becomes a learning experience about his life and a search for answers about his death. The plot is nothing spectacular, but it's solid enough to carry the movie. It's pretty interesting to be able to see a number of different perspectives on Van Gogh from characters based on real-life people that met him during his life. And I learned more about his life and death than I ever knew I wanted to know. But let's be honest, nobody watches Loving Vincent for the plot. If you're watching this movie, you're watching it for the stunning animation style. Every single one of the movie's over 65,000 frames was hand-painted, and a great number of them were designed to emulate the style of Van Gogh itself. The whole experience is a feast for the eyes as the protagonist visits scene after scene, adapted directly from some of his most famous works, and transitions from the Van Gogh-esque style of the film's present to the more realistic-looking black and white flashback vignettes. It's definitely worth taking a look at if you have any interest in the life or work of one of the most famous artists in history. My honorable mentions from this year are Cars 3 and Coco. Number 2, 2016. This one is, admittedly, one of the most subjective picks on the list, as it has quickly become one of my all-time favorite movies. But I do truly believe that it has plenty of merit outside of my own experience with it. The 2016 animated movie of the year is the Kyoto animation film A Silent Voice. Now, I'll just say right off the bat that I have never in my life seen myself in a fictional character more than I see myself in the protagonist of this movie, and that's probably a huge reason why I love it so much, but it's far from being the only reason this film is great. A Silent Voice follows high schooler Shoya Ishida as his struggle against depression leads him to reconnect with a former classmate he used to bully, and how their exploration of their unusual relationship affects the rest of their lives. The movie has been praised for its depiction of disability and how well the cinematography communicates the main character's social anxiety. The pacing is phenomenal, slow but meaningful. It lets you relax when the characters do, and the way the film handles tension is masterful. The way the story treats complex and heavy topics like depression, confusion about one's own identity, and fear for a loved one's life is so real and raw that there are scenes that still give me chills every time I watch it. And I've seen this movie 6 or 7 times at least. The characters are all believable and almost all endearing, and the film takes care to make sure that it's always the characters driving the plot, rather than the plot pulling the characters. Wrap this all up in a beautiful package of visuals and sound, and you've got a truly amazing experience. I could go on and on about this movie for hours, but we don't have that kind of time right now. So all I'll say is that if you haven't seen this film yet and can handle a little bit of heavy subject matter, please give it a chance. It is so good. My honorable mentions for this year are Moana, Zootopia, and Your Name. Number 1, 2018. How could it be anything else? You all already know what's coming, so why even delay it? The 2018 animated movie of the year, and the best animated movie of the decade, is Sony Animation's Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Spider-Verse follows the brilliant but unmotivated Miles Morales as he navigates becoming the new Spider-Man on the block and fulfilling the last wish of the late Peter Parker, with the help of a few other spider people dragged into his universe from an assortment of alternate worlds. What can I say about Spider-Verse that hasn't already been said? It's going to be at the top of basically any list like this you see, and there are a billion reviews out there that will do this movie much greater service than I can. So all I'll say is this. I'm really glad that this movie exists. It's movies like this that remind me just what animation is capable of and why I enjoy it so much. My honorable mentions for this year are Incredibles 2 and Ralph Breaks the Internet. And quick bonus round! My personal, subjective top 10 favorite animated movies of the decade. Number 10, Tangled. Number 9, The Peanuts Movie. Number 8, Inside Out. Number 7, How to Train Your Dragon. Number 6, Megamind. Number 5, Wreck-It Ralph. Number 4, Zootopia. Number 3, Coco. Number 2, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And number 1, A Silent Voice. Speaking of movies, I have a small announcement for those of you who have managed to listen to my voice for so long. At the end of my Dark Waters review, I mentioned I would be making another So I Just Watched video on a movie that was much more mainstream, and as you may have guessed, I was referring to Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. Unfortunately, that video has been scrapped, so don't hold your breath for it. What I will likely be releasing in the near future is an announcement of my second Let's Play, so that's something to look forward to. Until then, I still don't have a coherent outro for my videos, so have a good day because you deserve it, and I'll see you again soon.